So I was asking you, how Honda is the new Ducati? Because it looks very much like a Honda. I know this has already been gone over a little bit, but I really want to get a little more deeper into it because at glance, I would guess that's a Honda.
And it sure is confusing with how many different red bikes we have now in the field. Considering Honda, gas, Beta, I know that has a little bit of blue in it, but still, for the most part, red.
Yep.
Now we'll have Ducati, which is another red motorcycle manufacturer brand. Having all those red bikes out in the same field, I know the Stark is kind of the exception there, but having all those other brands running red plastic is going to be really confusing for a lot of the announcers. So I'd hate to be an announcer for the Pro Motocross, Super Motocross, MXGP, because it's going to be easily confused between other bikes.
Yeah, you know what, man? 'Cause I mean, the red is what really stands out. And then you see show of suspension, same as the Hondas. And then you got a frame that looks very similar with it being aluminum frame, perimeter style. The fuel tank with how that looks. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Like, I love the Hondas. So if this bike is going to be another Honda style bike, but with a Ducati engine inside of it, I think that's very cool.
A lot of people might feel the other way, and a lot of people might agree with what you just said. And I feel like when a new bike comes out, I feel as if a lot of us within the motocross industry are quick to say, oh, it looks like this, or oh, it looks like that. And granted, yes, do a lot of the bikes have some similarities? Like I know the Triumph when it got released, it looks like a KTM engine, which it very much does. And the Ducati frame, or the main frame that is, does look a lot like a 2021 to 2024 CRF450R main frame. Granted, this bike has something very unique and special about it with the Desmo valve train system, which we will get into in a little bit, but there is a lot of similarities between the two. And I wonder, obviously Ducati did their homework and looked at all the bikes within the motocross segment, but I wonder how much of that Honda was their benchmark to go back to back between their Desmo bike and the CRF450R.
Yeah, same. I'm curious as how inspired they were. That was it the Honda that really inspired them, or did they do their homework and then come to a similar conclusion as Honda, meaning they sat down and reviewed different style of frames and went, wow, you know, this style of frame makes the most sense, this style of swing arm, this way of making the plastics and so forth. Obviously they have, as you alluded to, their own take on how to build an engine, which is really cool and unique to Ducati. You and I took a deep dive looking at all the bikes that Ducati makes, and we noticed that the majority of their bikes are steel frame. I would think that's quite a big jump in tooling and fabricating for Ducati to go from primarily making steel frame motorcycles to going, hey, you know what? For this application, it seems to be aluminum is going to be the best choice.
It's really cool that they did opt to go with an aluminum style frame. Obviously, a majority of the motorcycle manufacturers, I'm kind of counting KTM as one here, KTM Husky Gas as one. A majority of them in our motorcycle segment are aluminum. I'm sure they've probably looked into and maybe even tested both chromoly steel and aluminum. I'm really curious to hear what other people have to say that are riding the bike, that don't work for Ducati, that don't have a vested interest within the company or the bike. Speaking of how it performs out on the track, it hasn't lacked in results, and it has something very exciting this coming weekend with Tony Caroli debuting it in the MXGP series at the Motocross of Netherlands. I look for big things from Tony Caroli and his, I guess you should say, teammate slash tester slash developer of the bike, Alessandro Lupino, who currently leads the Italian Motocross Championship with only 2 rounds to go.
What a good start for them, man, with their racing and them jumping into the MXGP soon.
Yeah, and they're able to do that because there's no homologation or production rule. So it's really cool to see them go ahead and do that. And speaking of Ducati, when I was watching the Unadilla Race Day live show, that's the qualifying show, I did see 2 Ducati personnel standing behind the gate.
Really?
I think it was really early in the show. It's right before the 250 qualifying where they're doing the 250 riders are doing their start practices. And I saw 2 Ducati personnel. Obviously, they've been here in the States at other races, Supercross and Motocross in the past, but it's just cool to see them over here with no riders over here. They're probably watching and seeing the current crop of riders in the Pro Motocross 450 class, that is. Just getting a valid assessment on who they're going to go after when they enter Supercross in 2026.
Yeah, you know, with all these extra manufacturers entering, I would hope and think that's really driving up the cost of riders. Because we only got, well, we've got many talented riders, but there are always the cream of the crop. And Ducati being such a legacy company, likely they're going to want a top caliber rider for their team. And a lot of those guys are already spoken for. So they're going to have to be throwing some big money, I think, in order to get somebody to, one, jump on their first year program and leave a trusted team that they know they have good experience with.
Yeah, and speaking of 2026, a lot of marquee riders are going to be ending their contract at the end of 2025 and will be available for hire in 2026. I think of Chase Sexton, who we think his contract will end. He may have a third-year option with KTM that he may elect to choose to go follow through or not. His teammate Aaron Plessinger will be up. Who knows what Eli Tomac is going to do after 2025. Cooper Webb seems to be locked in with this Monster Energy Star Racing Yamaha team for the next couple of years, so I don't expect a big change from him. Ken Roczen is another rider, high-level rider to not really have a home even for 25.
And he's really worldwide, meaning like he started over in Europe, or obviously Deutschland, Germany. Grew up there, but racing Europe, was pro there. So I think if Ducati wanted a rider that is on the same maybe world stage as Antonio Caroli, but more currently relevant in the US, Roczen would be a great point. That's somebody pick. That's somebody that could race here locally in the US in the AMA and Supercross Nationals. You could also do the World Supercross races. That could be a really good pick for him.
There's also the wild card, in my opinion, which is going to be Hayden Deegan. We will see him jump up. It's the 450 class, and who knows if he's looking at a long-term home with Monster Star Racing Yamaha or if he wants to shop around elsewhere. And obviously there's other riders in the paddock, whether 250 or 450, that Ducati could go after in 26. But yeah, I feel like the riders that we discussed are maybe the high on the list and radar of Ducati. Before we get too sidetracked, though, I want to focus on two different things.
Yes.
First off is the current stance of Ducati. Ducati is owned by the Volkswagen Group. So
they're huge.
Yeah, and they're not shy to, let's say, throw their dick around when it comes to acquiring brands.
You got to be PC, bud. Come on.
Yeah.
Throw their dildo around.
Right. So Ducati falls under the progressive category or segment underneath the Volkswagen Group. Three other brands that we all know and maybe even love in the automotive world fall under that category as well, in Audi, Lamborghini, and Bentley. And the goal underneath the progressive group in the Volkswagen Group, I should say, is to actually share information towards an electric future. Now, we'll save the electric talk for another day. I feel like they have a lot of access to certain things that maybe other motorcycle manufacturers might not have.
Really good point. Yeah, they're going to have some really deep resources and also some probably technology that is a bit farther along on the auto side than it is on the motorcycle side, that they can see if there's any possible application that they can, yield from that knowledge that they got.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just summed up what I was trying to say in about 4 words, and I said it in about 50.
You set the precedence, man. It was good. You got it all lined up. So
that's good. And another thing that I wanted to mention is the componentry of the actual Desmo450 MX itself. Looking at the factory bike that Antonio Caroli and Alessandro Lupino have been racing,
I'm checking out that right now.
It features Showa A-Kit style suspension. Both fork and shock. It has an STM clutch, which Ducati isn't, let's say, stranger to working with on their sport bikes. Also, Brembo brakes, which we all, I think, know and love if you're into KTM. I'm a huge fan of the Brembo brakes over the Nissan brakes. A Krapovich exhaust. And other, we see Galfer rotors as a sponsor, an Acerby or a Cherby for the plastics. Some other brands that we're used to seeing within the motocross industry. So this is a very high-level bike, is what I'm trying to get at here.
It is.
This isn't a bike that is coming around and is lacking in any technology or any componentry when you compare it to other factory bikes. Now, obviously, this isn't the production bike. It'll look quite a bit different. I don't expect a production bike to come out with a kit style suspension or maybe even an exhaust, unless they do a factory edition, which would be really cool. But yeah, this bike seems to be hitting the ground and running quite quickly.
Yeah, it does, man. Going back to the componentry, like you said, it's got the Showa suspension on it. The triple clamps look very similar in, let's say, styling or like the geometry of the clamp to like the HRC clamps. The rear shock looks to be very much like the shock on the new KX450. So not quite like the Honda rear shock where the reservoir of the body goes horizontal. It has the shock nitrogen tank going up and down vertical instead of horizontal like our Honda shock does. Here we go. So nice little side-to-side comparison. The reason I bring that up is if Ducati made such a different style frame and Showa is the one supporting them, Showa's not only giving them suspension, but they usually come with their own tech as well, or multiple techs, to help the manufacturer set the suspension up right. Because Showa has vested interest as well. They don't want to give them kit suspension and have the bike look bad. So with that in mind, I would think there had to have been some sort of collaboration between the two. Now Honda has owned, and I think it's recently changed, but has had a big interest in controlling majority of the Showa Corporation. That's why every Honda for a long time has pretty much always come with a Showa suspension on it. There's a few out there that have had KYBs, but it's almost always been Showa. In contrast, Yamaha owns KYB. That's why we find almost every Yamaha motorcycle with KYB suspension on it. So that's what really leads me to think that the chassis of the motorcycle can't be that very different than the Honda. Because just looking at it, it strikingly looks a similarity. And then that gives these Showa technicians and engineers a really good starting point. Hey, we know you have a chassis that's similar to this, similar weight bias, and so forth. They have some sort of a framework from the ground to start from. Because at least that way they can hit the ground running with some settings that they know will work well and then start tweaking from there. Really cool bike. I can't wait to see him, and I want to hear him. I know we've heard him in videos, but in person, I think that Desmo valve train has got to have a really unique sound to it.
Yeah, and just a brief summary of the Desmo or the Desmo-Dromic valve system is instead of having a return spring to close the valve, it has a secondary cam lobe to close the valve. So it'll have a cam lobe to open it and a finger follower, and also a secondary cam lobe to close it. So it eliminates the need for a return spring for closing that valve. Now, one of the advantages of this is it has a higher rev ceiling than compared to the traditional style valve systems that we see in the Kawasaki's, Suzuki's, Yamahas, Hondas, etc. One thing I think that is really going to bode well, especially for these 450s and even 250s when Ducati starts to make them.
Right, or 350s.
Or 350s, even better, is I think we're going to finally have a 450 that's rideable in the sense.
Oh, I see.
And you could, I feel like, just be in second gear the entire track. And on some 450s, you kind of already are, depending on the track. But
yeah.
I feel like if you're, I mean, I've heard of some of these Desmo systems revving up to, 20,000 RPM or something ridiculous like that. If you have a motocross bike that's going to rev out that high, I mean, I don't see the need for like a fourth gear, a fifth gear.
Yeah, right.
When it goes that high. So I am personally really excited to see this bike and see the production form of this bike, because I am partial to 350s over 450s. And I think you're maybe a little bit more partial to 450s over 350s, correct?
I'm on the line.
Flirting with it.
Yeah, I think the Stark's my favorite now.
Yeah.
The more I ride it, but I don't want to piss off too many people.
Yeah. But anyways, anyways, after owning a 2024 KX450, I don't think I'd go out and buy another 450, famous last words. But this would be the 450. If I had to pick one, I think this would be the 450 that I would go for.
Over the Triumph?
Over the Triumph, over the Yamaha.
You're giving equal choices. Brand new Triumph, brand new Ducati.
Maybe it's the Italian in me.
Okay.
But I think at the end of the day, this bike just has something sexy about it. Do I think it's the best looking bike? No. But overall, I would choose this bike because I want my bike to perform good. I want it to just look good. When I walk into the garage, I want to look at the bike and just be like, dude, I want to freaking ride that thing. And not be like, man, like, I have to ride this thing. That sounds like so shitty to say in a way. Yeah. But there's times where I'm like, man, I'm going to go at the track. It's just, the track's going to be hammered and I'm going to be hardly holding on to the thing. Yeah. Yeah. No, good point, man. It's, I'm really excited to start seeing how that bike tests and the type of reviews it gets in comparison to the other brand bikes that we do have available. Just from the clips we've seen, Antonio's looking good on it. His teammate is looking good on it as well. So, I mean, it looks like they're off to a really good start also. It seems like maybe Beta is struggling the most in terms of maybe just like brand perception, because Beta's out there racing professionally, but it seems like the perception maybe isn't as high. But KTM just has that legacy. Sorry, not KTM. Ducati has that legacy
of just being around for so long that I think KTM's trying to work towards with their recent, not recent at this point, but with their presence in MotoGP now and starting to take over the road side of things. So it's cool to see KTM making a bigger push into the road side of things, and now Ducati with such legacy and history on the road or street, now trying to make a big push back into the moto side of things.
One big talking point with this bike is where it's going to fall on the price point of things. Now, that's a hot topic. I actually have, I guess, a hot take on it. Just being in the motorcycle industry for a couple of years, working at a dealership, and now being here at Ride JBI.
Give them a shout out. What dealership was it?
Langston Motorsports.
Hit them up.
Yep, hit them up if you're in the Southern California area. Great guys over there. I wanted to touch on price real quick because I feel like it's an important topic to talk about when a bike is getting released. So the current crop of 450s, the most expensive bike out there is the 2025 Husqvarna FC450, which retails for $11,399.
Really?
Now that is the base bike. That's not the Rockstar Energy factory edition bike. KTM falls in $100 behind that for the base bike. It's $11,299. That gas is a couple $100 behind at $10,499. What I'm trying to get at is, I've seen a lot of people talk about, oh, it's going to be like a $20,000 bike. I totally disagree, because if you're going to come out with let's say a bike that just has your standard Showa suspension, it doesn't have an exhaust, it has, let's say, cast triple clamps or even billet triple clamps if you want to, like what we see on the KTM Group bikes and the KTM and Husqvarnas, traction control, electric start, like all your little goodies. I don't see it being more than, and I feel like this is even being generous, I don't see it being more than $15,000.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Not. Right.
And just coming from the standpoint of working at a dealership and seeing how much rebate money is available on the KTMs, which is the highest, arguably the highest price point bike in the segment, some of the rebates on those bikes are up to $3,000. I mean, that you're taking the bike that once was $11,299 all the way down to $8,299 right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I think if it's that high, I just don't know if Ducati's really understanding the dirt bike market. This isn't the time of COVID anymore where the sport is booming and dirt bikes are flying off the shelf, gear is flying off the shelf, and it's hard to find. And I think a lot of these dealerships were able to capitalize off of COVID and charge high markups for bikes. And I think a lot of us are kind of over that, over the markups and over the prices of bikes going up each and every year. To see, let's say they come out with a factory edition, I could see that being more in the ballpark of like a $15,000 range.
Smart.
But realistically, if they come out with a production style bike, I don't think I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say maybe it's in the $12,599 to $12,999 range.
Really good take, and just perspective on that. You are spot on. I think before they can try to charge maybe like a premium on everybody, they need to show that they can first compete with everybody. So I'm not saying price the bike cheapest out of everyone, but to try to go ahead and be a price leader is being very confident in yourself. And in that case, you better perform.
Yeah.
Because our industry, it's fickle. A lot of us are cheap dirt bike riders, and that's not saying that's not a bad thing. We are in an expensive sport. So when it comes time for us to buy a bike, we want to make sure we're either getting a hell of a deal so we have extra money to spend on it to make it the bike we want, or we want an awesome bike right off the dealership floor that we don't have to spend much money on.
I think that's very well said. And I'm just super excited to see the production style of this bike. I think it's going to be maybe even up to a year, maybe even more until we actually see the bike itself, the production bike that is. But it's just cool to see that these Desmo450 MX bikes rolling around and being debuted in the MXGP series this Saturday. So I don't keep up with the GPs as much as I should. I have the pass and I'm just feel like I'm wasting money every single weekend that I'm not racing or not watching the races, but I will be glued to the TV both Saturday for the qualifying race and Sunday. So I'm really excited to see it. Do you have any predictions for the 9-time world champ this weekend, Tony Crowley?
I think he's gonna have a similar finish like he did here at Fox Raceway and then be somewhere in the top 5. So man, I'm rooting for you, Big Tony. I think you still freaking got it. I don't know if you got a race win in you. Just the competition is incredible right now. If you do, I'd be so excited. Yeah. But I think it's hard to count the guy out of a top 5. I think if Tony's racing, it's because he wants to be there and he wants to go do it. And it's hard to beat a racer when they want to be there instead of they've been through a grueling season. He's showing up towards the end of the season, probably been having a great time testing the bike, figuring out stuff, and you get to go have fun.
If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the Ride JBI YouTube channel for more shop talk, JBI race recap, JBI tech tip, or JBI spec videos. We appreciate you guys watching, and we will see you in the next one.